in the vast tapestry of ancient mythology, where gods and mortals dance through tales of triumph and tragedy, one divine figure emerged whose very essence would reshape the understanding of power itself. This is not merely the story of another Olympian deity, but the chronicle of wisdom incarnate, of strategy perfected, of a goddess whose birth defied the natural order and whose influence would echo through millennia of human civilization. Tonight, as you drift into the realm of dreams, let us journey together through the complete history of Athena, the grey-eyed goddess whose very name commanded respect from the mightiest heroes and whose counsel shaped the fate of nations. Her story begins not with gentle birth pangs or loving cradles, but with a prophecy so terrifying that it drove the king of gods himself to acts of desperate cunning. Long before the marble temples of Athens gleamed under Mediterranean sunlight, before philosophers would gather in her sacred groves to debate the nature of existence, there lived among the Titans a goddess of profound wisdom named Metis. She possessed knowledge that transcended mortal understanding, secrets that could unravel the very fabric of divine authority. Zeus, in his relentless pursuit of power, had taken Metis as his first wife, drawn by her incomparable intelligence and strategic mind. But the fates had woven a prophecy that would haunt Zeus throughout his reign. They proclaimed that Metis would bear 2 children. First, a daughter of extraordinary wisdom, and then a son destined to overthrow his father, just as Zeus had overthrown Kronos, and Kronos had overthrown Uranus before him. The cycle of divine patricide seemed destined to continue, with Zeus himself becoming the victim rather than the victor. Fear, that most human of emotions, crept into the heart of the thunder god. He could not bear the thought of losing his hard-won dominion over heaven and earth. In a moment of calculated desperation, Zeus employed the same treacherous cunning that had served him well against his father. He approached Metis with honeyed words and false affection, convincing her to transform herself into various shapes as a playful diversion. When she had assumed the form of a drop of water, Zeus swallowed her whole, believing he had eliminated the threat to his throne forever. Yet the fates are not so easily thwarted, and divine pregnancy follows laws unknown to mortal medicine. Within Zeus's skull, Metis continued to nurture the child she carried, weaving armor and crafting weapons with supernatural skill. The unborn goddess grew in wisdom and strength, fed by her mother's knowledge and her father's divine essence. As months passed, Zeus began to suffer from headaches of unprecedented intensity, pain so severe that it threatened to drive even the king of gods to madness. The agony became unbearable. Zeus summoned Hephaestus, the master craftsman of the gods, whose skill with hammer and anvil surpassed all others. With desperate urgency, Zeus commanded his son to split open his skull with the sharpest axe in all creation. Hephaestus, though reluctant to strike his father, obeyed the divine command. The bronze blade fell with tremendous force, cleaving Zeus's head with a sound like thunder rolling across the heavens. From that divine wound sprang forth not blood or brain matter, but a fully grown goddess arrayed in gleaming armor, her grey eyes blazing with intelligence that encompassed all knowledge, her spear raised high in greeting to the assembled Olympians. She emerged not as a helpless infant, but as a warrior goddess of incomparable majesty, her birth cry echoing across the cosmos like a battle hymn that announced the arrival of wisdom itself. This was Athena, born not of woman, but of pure thought, carrying within her essence both her mother's wisdom and her father's authority. The other gods fell silent before her presence, recognizing immediately that they stood before a deity whose nature transcended their understanding. She embodied the perfect fusion of intellectual prowess and martial skill, of strategic thinking and courageous action. Zeus gazed upon his daughter with mingled pride and relief. The prophecy had been fulfilled, yet subverted. he had gained a daughter of extraordinary wisdom without suffering the threat of a son who might challenge his rule. Athena, born from his own mind, would serve as his most trusted advisor and fiercest defender. She became the goddess who would never rebel against paternal authority, for she was, in essence, an extension of Zeus's own divine intelligence. The grey-eyed goddess quickly established herself among the Olympians as a force unlike any other. While Ares reveled in the chaos and bloodshed of warfare, Athena approached conflict with calculated precision. She understood that true victory came not from brute strength alone, but from the careful application of strategy, timing, and wisdom. Her warfare was surgical rather than savage, designed to achieve specific objectives with minimal waste of resources or life. Ancient poets would sing of her divine attributes, the aegis that adorned her breast, bearing the terrifying visage of the Gorgon Medusa, capable of striking fear into the hearts of even the bravest warriors. Her spear, forged in the fires of divine craftsmanship, never missed its intended target. Her shield, polished to mirror brightness, could reflect both physical attacks and reveal hidden truths to those worthy of her favor. Yet Athena's true power lay not in her weapons, but in her mind. She possessed the ability to see through deception, to understand the deeper currents that moved both gods and mortals. Where other deities acted on impulse or emotion, Athena deliberated with careful thought. She could perceive the consequences of actions before they unfolded, understanding how each decision would ripple through the threads of fate. Her wisdom extended beyond military strategy to encompass all forms of human endeavor. She became the patron of craftsmen and artisans, teaching mortals the skills of metalworking, pottery, and weaving. Under her guidance, human civilization began to flourish in ways previously unimaginable. She showed them how to domesticate the olive tree, providing not only food, but oil for lamps, cooking, and sacred rituals. The goddess took particular interest in architecture and city planning, understanding that the physical organization of human settlements reflected their moral and intellectual development. She taught mortals to build not merely for shelter, but for beauty, functionality, and harmony with the natural world. Her influence could be seen in every well-planned street, every elegant column, every building designed to inspire rather than merely contain. As her reputation spread throughout the ancient world, heroes began seeking her counsel before embarking on their great quests. She appeared to them not as a distant, unapproachable deity, but as a wise mentor whose guidance could mean the difference between triumph and disaster. Her interventions were subtle, yet decisive, providing crucial advice at moments when human courage alone proved insufficient. Among all the heroes who would benefit from her wisdom, none would forge a more enduring partnership with the grey-eyed goddess than Odysseus, king of Ithaca. In him, she recognized a kindred spirit, a mortal whose mind worked with the same strategic precision that characterized her own divine nature. While other heroes relied primarily on physical prowess, Odysseus understood that intelligence could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. Their relationship began during the siege of Troy, that 10-year conflict that would become the defining war of the ancient world. While the Greek forces hammered uselessly against the impregnable walls of Ilium, growing frustrated with their inability to breach the city's defenses, Athena whispered a revolutionary strategy into the mind of her chosen hero. The plan that emerged from this divine inspiration would become legendary. A massive wooden horse, hollow within, large enough to conceal a select group of Greek warriors. The Greeks would pretend to abandon their siege, leaving behind only this apparent offering to the gods. The Trojans, believing they had achieved victory, would drag the horse within their walls as a trophy of war. The execution of this strategy required not only military skill, but profound understanding of human psychology. Athena helped Odysseus craft a deception so complete that even the wisest Trojans were convinced of its authenticity. She guided every detail of the plan, from the construction of the horse to the performance of the Greek withdrawal, ensuring that nothing would betray the true nature of the stratagem. But while the mortal world prepared for war's end, Athena's gaze turned inward, to the uneasy balance that ruled Olympus itself. For even among gods, victory carried its own price. The fall of Troy had not yet come, and already the scales of fate trembled beneath the weight of divine interference. Athena understood that every act of guidance, every whisper into a mortal's ear, shifted the great equilibrium that bound heaven and earth. In the quiet halls of Olympus, she debated with her kin. Hera, ever proud and vindictive, demanded the total annihilation of Troy for Paris's insult. Aphrodite, radiant and unrepentant, argued for mercy, for even love's folly deserved survival. Athena stood between them, the embodiment of reason amid passion's storm. Her words carried neither rage nor sentiment, but the cool weight of inevitability. "Let mortals suffer what their choices demand," she declared. "We are gods, not guardians of their will. Wisdom is not mercy, it is consequence understood." Yet beneath her measured tone stirred a subtle unease. Athena had seen too many mortals perish under divine rivalry, too many destinies warped by celestial pride. She longed, perhaps more than any other Olympian, for humanity to grow beyond dependency, beyond prayer, beyond divine meddling. But such evolution required struggle, and struggle demanded teachers. If mortals were to learn wisdom, they would have to earn it in fire and tears. As the Greeks readied the fateful horse and the Trojans celebrated their hollow victory, Athena walked unseen through Troy's streets, disguised in mortal form. She observed the people's joy, their laughter echoing off marble and gold, the flicker of torchlight dancing on the city's gates. There were mothers cradling children, craftsmen raising goblets to the sky, soldiers singing songs of deliverance. For a brief, fragile moment, even a goddess of wisdom could pity them. "They believe they are free," she murmured to herself. But freedom without understanding is merely another kind of blindness. With a sigh that stirred no breeze, she touched one of the wooden beams of the great horse. Beneath her fingers, divine energy flowed, binding destiny to the trap she had helped conceive. The wood pulsed faintly, alive with the inevitability of ruin. That night, as the moon traced a silver path across the Aegean sky, Athena ascended once more to Olympus. There she stood beside Zeus, who watched the unfolding drama below with his thunderous eyes. "You pity them," he said without accusation, "yet you are the architect of their end." "Wisdom is not compassion," Athena replied softly. "It is the light by which compassion may see clearly." Zeus nodded, both proud and wary of his daughter's depth. "And yet," he said, "for all your wisdom, you cannot change the hearts of men." "Nor would I," she answered, "for hearts must break before they can truly understand." The fall of Troy came as she had foreseen, swift, merciless, and absolute. But as flames devoured the city's towers, Athena wept. Not for the dead, but for what had been lost. The opportunity for wisdom untainted by deceit. She had given mankind strategy, reason, and invention. Yet even these gifts had been turned to destruction. In that realization, the goddess understood her own eternal burden: to guide without controlling, to teach without erasing free will, to illuminate paths mortals must still choose for themselves. When dawn rose over the smouldering ruins of Troy, Athena's tears turned to pearls, falling into the sea. The waves carried them across distant shores, where they would one day be found by poets who mistook them for tokens of beauty, never realizing they were crystallized regret from the mind of a god. When night fell, and the hidden warriors emerged from their wooden concealment to open Troy's gates to their returning comrades, Athena's strategic genius had achieved what 10 years of conventional warfare could not accomplish. The fall of Troy became a testament to the power of intelligence over brute force, of careful planning over reckless assault. Yet this triumph would mark only the beginning of the most challenging chapter in Odysseus's life, and consequently the most profound demonstration of Athena's divine guidance. The journey home from Troy, which should have taken mere weeks, would stretch into a decade-long odyssey that would test both hero and goddess to their very limits. The wrath of Poseidon, Earthshaker and lord of the wine-dark seas, fell upon Odysseus like a tempest that would not break. The hero's journey home became a labyrinthine nightmare of supernatural obstacles, each more perilous than the last. Yet through every trial, every moment when death seemed certain and hope appeared lost, the grey-eyed goddess maintained her vigilant watch over her chosen champion. Athena understood that Odysseus faced more than mere physical dangers. His greatest enemy was not the Cyclops Polyphemus, whose eye he had cleverly put out, nor the vengeful sea god who pursued him across the Mediterranean. His true adversary was time itself and the gradual erosion of memory that threatened to erase him from the hearts of those he loved most. Each year of his absence weakened the bonds that tied him to Ithaca, to his faithful wife Penelope, and to his son Telemachus, who had grown from boy to man without ever knowing his father's guiding hand. The goddess recognized that this battle required weapons more subtle than spear and shield. She began weaving a complex strategy that would operate simultaneously on multiple fronts, preserving Odysseus's legacy even as she worked to secure his physical return. Her divine influence extended not only to the hero himself, but to those who waited for him, strengthening their resolve and protecting them from the dangers that multiplied in his absence. In the halls of Ithaca's palace, arrogant suitors had gathered like vultures around Carrion, consuming Odysseus's wealth while pressing Penelope to choose a new husband. They believed the king dead and his throne vacant, ripe for claiming by whoever could win the hand of his widow. These men represented everything Athena despised: greed masquerading as ambition, violence without honor, and the complete absence of wisdom in their pursuit of power. The goddess appeared to young Telemachus in the form of Mentes, a trusted family friend, planting in the prince's mind the courage necessary to challenge the suitor's presumption. Under her guidance, the young man began his own journey of discovery, traveling to the courts of other heroes who had returned from Troy, gathering news of his father while developing the leadership skills he would need to reclaim his birthright. This intervention revealed Athena's understanding of human nature at its most profound level. She recognized that Telemachus could not simply inherit his father's throne through bloodline alone. The young prince needed to earn his authority through demonstrated courage and wisdom, proving himself worthy of the crown not merely by birth, but by character. The goddess orchestrated his travels to serve as both education and trial, transforming a sheltered youth into a man capable of standing beside his father as an equal. Meanwhile, Odysseus himself wandered through adventures that tested every aspect of his heroic nature. When he encountered the Sirens, whose songs promised knowledge of all things that had been and would be, Athena's wisdom guided him to experience their revelation without succumbing to their deadly allure. The strategy of stopping his men's ears with wax while binding himself to the mast allowed him to gain the Sirens' knowledge while avoiding their trap, demonstrating once again how intelligence could triumph over supernatural danger. The goddess watched as her champion faced the monster Scylla and the whirlpool Charybdis, that impossible choice between certain loss and total destruction. Her counsel helped him navigate these straits with the minimum sacrifice possible, understanding that leadership sometimes required making terrible decisions for the greater good. 6 men died to Scylla's ravening heads, but the ship and the remaining crew survived to continue their journey home. When Odysseus finally reached the island of the Phaeacians, Athena ensured that he received not only shelter, but the means to complete his voyage. She appeared to Princess Nausicaa in a dream, inspiring the young woman to venture to the shore where she would encounter the shipwrecked hero. Through careful orchestration of events, the goddess arranged for Odysseus to tell his story to King Alcinous, whose generous nature would provide the ships necessary for the final leg of the journey to Ithaca. Yet Athena's most masterful stroke came when Odysseus finally set foot on his native soil after 20 years of absence. Rather than allowing him to rush immediately to his palace, she disguised him as an elderly beggar, providing him with the perfect opportunity to assess the situation in his homeland without revealing his identity. This deception served multiple purposes. It allowed him to gather intelligence about the suitor's numbers and intentions, to test the loyalty of his servants and subjects, and to plan his revenge with characteristic precision. The transformation also served a deeper psychological purpose. Odysseus needed to see how completely the suitors had dishonored his house, how thoroughly they had abused the sacred laws of hospitality. Only by witnessing their crimes firsthand could he justify the terrible vengeance that Athena was helping him plan. The goddess understood that justice required not only punishment, but moral clarity about why that punishment was necessary. In the guise of the beggar, Odysseus observed Penelope's continued faithfulness, her clever delaying tactics that had kept the suitors at bay for years. He watched her weave and unweave her father-in-law's funeral shroud, buying precious time with this stratagem that rivaled his own tactical brilliance. The reunion of husband and wife, when it finally came, represented the triumph not only of individual heroism, but of shared commitment to ideals that transcended immediate gratification. Athena's presence during the final confrontation with the suitors revealed her nature as a goddess of righteous warfare rather than mere violence. She did not simply grant Odysseus superhuman strength to overwhelm his enemies through brute force. Instead, she ensured that justice was served through superior strategy and moral authority. The hero's knowledge of his own bow, his unmatched skill with the weapon that no other man could even string, became the instrument of divine retribution. The slaughter of the suitors marked not the end of conflict, but its transformation into lasting peace. Athena understood that vengeance alone could never restore order to Ithaca. The families of the dead men would seek their own revenge, creating an endless cycle of bloodshed that would ultimately destroy the kingdom Odysseus had fought so hard to preserve. Therefore, the goddess intervened directly to establish a peace that would endure, using her divine authority to compel reconciliation where human emotion demanded continued warfare. This intervention demonstrated one of Athena's most important characteristics: her understanding that true victory required not just defeating one's enemies, but creating conditions where future conflict became unnecessary. She recognized that peace was not merely the absence of war, but the presence of justice, wisdom, and mutual respect among all members of society. The partnership between Athena and Odysseus represented the ideal relationship between divine wisdom and human capability. The goddess never solved problems for her champion, but rather provided him with the insight necessary to solve them himself. She offered guidance without removing the need for courage, wisdom without eliminating the requirement for action, protection without preventing the hero from facing genuine danger and making meaningful choices. Through their collaboration, both goddess and hero demonstrated that intelligence could overcome seemingly impossible odds, that careful planning could achieve what reckless bravery could not, and that wisdom represented the highest form of power available to both mortal and divine beings. Their story became a template for heroic achievement that would inspire countless generations of leaders, strategists, and thinkers who sought to emulate their example. Yet Odysseus represented only one facet of Athena's influence on the ancient world. Her wisdom extended far beyond individual heroics to encompass the fundamental structures of human civilization. She became the patron goddess of the greatest city of the ancient world, and her contest for that honor would reveal both her competitive nature and her deep understanding of what mortals truly needed to flourish. The story of how Athens received its name speaks to Athena's vision of human potential and her commitment to fostering growth rather than mere survival. When the newly founded city required a patron deity, both Athena and Poseidon presented themselves as candidates, each offering gifts that reflected their divine nature and priorities. The contest that followed would determine not only the city's name, but the values that would guide its development for centuries to come. Poseidon, master of earthquakes and tempests, struck the earth with his mighty trident, and from that blow sprang forth a salt-water well. The assembled citizens watched in awe as the god of the seas demonstrated his power, the very ground trembling beneath their feet as brackish water bubbled up from the depths. His gift spoke of strength, of dominion over the vast oceans that connected distant lands, of the fearsome power that could either destroy cities with tsunamis or fill their harbours with merchant vessels bearing wealth from across the known world. The Earthshaker's offering impressed many among the crowd. Here was tangible proof of divine might, a demonstration that left no doubt about the god's ability to protect or punish as circumstances required. Poseidon's followers argued passionately that their city needed such strength, such decisive power to defend against enemies and secure prosperity through maritime trade. The practical benefits seemed obvious and immediate. Then Athena stepped forward, her grey eyes reflecting depths of wisdom that seemed to contain entire libraries of knowledge. She knelt upon the rocky soil and pressed her hand against the earth with gentle reverence. From that spot grew the first olive tree, its silver-green leaves shimmering in the Mediterranean sunlight, its branches already heavy with the fruit that would transform human civilization in ways the assembled mortals could barely comprehend. The goddess rose gracefully and addressed the citizens with words that carried the weight of prophecy. She explained that her gift would provide not merely immediate benefit, but enduring prosperity across generations. The olive tree would yield fruit for food, oil for lighting their homes and temples, ingredients for medicines that would heal the sick, and sacred chrism for religious ceremonies that would bind their community together in shared purpose. More significantly, Athena revealed that the olive branch would become the universal symbol of peace, recognized by all civilized peoples as a sign of diplomatic intent rather than hostile purpose. Her gift embodied the principle that true strength lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the capacity to create, nurture, and sustain. Where Poseidon offered power over others, Athena provided the tools for self-sufficiency and peaceful prosperity. The citizens deliberated with the gravity appropriate to such a momentous decision. They understood that their choice would determine not only their city's patron deity, but the fundamental character their civilization would develop. Would they embrace the raw power that could dominate through force? Or would they choose the wisdom that achieved greatness through intelligence, creativity, and moral authority? When the votes were counted, Athena had prevailed by the narrowest of margins. According to some accounts, the women of the city had been permitted to participate in this crucial decision, and their support for the goddess of wisdom proved decisive. This democratic process, revolutionary for its time, established precedents that would later flourish into the world's first experiments with representative government. Poseidon's reaction to defeat revealed the fundamental difference between his nature and Athena's approach to conflict. The sea god's fury manifested in floods and earthquakes that threatened to destroy the very city he had sought to protect. His response demonstrated that his offer of strength had come with implicit threats, that his protection would always depend upon continued appeasement and submission to his volatile temperament. Athena's response to her uncle's wrath showed why wisdom had triumphed over mere power. Rather than meeting force with force, she negotiated a settlement that honored Poseidon's dignity while protecting her new city from his destructive anger. She established sacred spaces where the sea god would receive proper worship and sacrifice, acknowledging his importance while maintaining her own primary authority. This diplomatic solution transformed a potential enemy into a reluctant ally, demonstrating that even divine conflicts could be resolved through intelligent compromise rather than endless warfare. The city that emerged under Athena's patronage became the jewel of the ancient world, a beacon of learning, art, and democratic ideals that would influence human civilization for millennia. Athens grew from a small settlement into an empire of the mind, attracting philosophers, artists, mathematicians, and political theorists from across the known world. The goddess's influence could be seen in every aspect of Athenian culture, from their revolutionary political systems to their unparalleled achievements in architecture, sculpture, and dramatic poetry. The Parthenon, that magnificent temple crowning the Acropolis, stood as the ultimate expression of Athena's aesthetic and spiritual ideals. Every column, every sculptural detail, every mathematical proportion reflected the goddess's belief that human creations should aspire to divine perfection while remaining grounded in practical functionality. The building served not merely as a place of worship, but as a treasury, a symbol of civic pride, and a demonstration of what human skill could achieve when guided by divine wisdom. Within the Parthenon stood Phidias's colossal statue of Athena Parthenos, a masterwork of ancient sculpture that captured the goddess's dual nature as both warrior and sage. Crafted from gold and ivory, the statue depicted Athena in full armor, yet her expression conveyed thoughtful benevolence rather than martial aggression. In one hand she held Nike, the personification of victory, while the other rested upon her shield, which bore intricate reliefs depicting the triumph of civilization over chaos, of order over destruction. The religious festivals that honored Athena became celebrations of human achievement as much as divine worship. The Panathenaea, held every 4 years with magnificent pageantry, featured competitions in athletics, music, poetry, and oratory that drew participants from throughout the Greek world. These contests embodied the goddess's belief that excellence should be pursued in all human endeavors, that physical prowess should be balanced with intellectual achievement, and that competition could inspire greatness rather than merely determining winners and losers. During these festivals, the entire city participated in weaving a new peplos, an elaborate robe that would adorn Athena's statue. This communal project symbolized the collaborative nature of civilization itself, showing how individual skills could combine to create something greater than any single person could achieve alone. Young women worked alongside experienced craftsmasters, learning techniques passed down through generations while contributing their own innovations to the eternal cycle of human creativity. The goddess's influence on Athenian military organization reflected her strategic philosophy that intelligence should guide strength rather than being subordinated to it. The Athenian army developed tactical innovations that maximized the effectiveness of citizen soldiers, men who fought not as professional warriors, but as free citizens defending their homeland and ideals. The phalanx formation, with its emphasis on coordination and mutual support, embodied Athena's principle that collective wisdom surpassed individual heroics. At sea, Athenian naval power grew under the goddess's guidance into the most formidable force the ancient world had ever seen. The trireme warships, with their revolutionary 3-tiered rowing arrangements, represented triumphs of engineering that combined speed, maneuverability, and striking power in ways that revolutionized naval warfare. Yet these vessels served primarily defensive purposes, protecting trade routes and deterring aggression rather than seeking conquest for its own sake. The Athenian approach to empire, though ultimately flawed by human ambition and fear, initially reflected Athena's vision of leadership through example rather than domination through force. The Delian League began as a voluntary association of city-states united in common defense against Persian threats, with Athens providing naval protection in exchange for financial contributions that supported the fleet's maintenance and operations. Under Athena's subtle influence, Athens became the intellectual capital of the ancient world, attracting brilliant minds who would establish the foundations of Western philosophy, science, and political theory. The goddess's presence could be felt in the dialogues of Plato, where reason and careful argumentation revealed eternal truths hidden beneath the surface of everyday experience. Her wisdom guided Aristotle's systematic investigations into logic, ethics, and natural philosophy, creating intellectual frameworks that would dominate scholarly thought for over 2 millennia. The dramatic festivals of Athens, held in Athena's honor, gave birth to theatrical forms that would become the cornerstones of Western literary tradition. Tragedy and comedy emerged from religious celebrations as sophisticated art forms capable of exploring the deepest questions of human existence. Playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides created works that examined the complex relationships between divine will and human choice, between individual desires and social obligations, between justice and mercy. These dramatic presentations served educational purposes that extended far beyond mere entertainment. Audiences witnessed the consequences of hubris and the rewards of wisdom, learning moral lessons through emotional engagement with fictional characters whose struggles reflected universal human dilemmas. Athena's influence ensured that these stories emphasized the power of intelligence and moral reasoning to overcome seemingly impossible challenges. The goddess's patronage extended to the development of historical writing as a distinct intellectual discipline. Herodotus and Thucydides, the fathers of historical scholarship, embodied Athena's commitment to understanding the past through careful investigation of evidence rather than mere repetition of traditional stories. Their works established standards for historical accuracy and analytical thinking that would guide scholarly research throughout subsequent centuries. In the realm of medicine, Athenian physicians developed approaches to healing that combined empirical observation with theoretical understanding, moving beyond purely supernatural explanations for disease towards systematic study of human anatomy and physiology. The goddess's influence encouraged practitioners to view healing as both art and science, requiring not only technical skill, but also wisdom in understanding each patient's unique circumstances and needs. The legal system that developed in Athens under Athena's guidance became a model for democratic justice that balanced individual rights with collective needs. The concept of trial by jury, where ordinary citizens determined guilt or innocence based on evidence and argumentation rather than social status or divine ordeal, represented a revolutionary advance in human governance. These legal innovations reflected the goddess's belief that wisdom could be found among common people when they were given proper information and encouraged to think carefully about complex issues. Athenian education, inspired by Athena's example, emphasized the development of both intellectual and physical capabilities. Young citizens learned rhetoric and philosophy alongside athletics and military training, preparing them for the diverse responsibilities of democratic participation. This educational philosophy recognized that effective citizenship required not only specialized knowledge, but also the ability to think critically about complex problems and communicate effectively with fellow citizens. The goddess's influence on Athenian commerce and craftsmanship created economic prosperity that supported the city's cultural achievements. Skilled artisans developed techniques in pottery, metalworking, and textile production that became renowned throughout the Mediterranean world. These craftspeople understood their work as forms of worship, creating objects that combined practical utility with aesthetic beauty in ways that honored divine creativity while serving human needs. Athenian coinage, bearing the goddess's owl and olive branch, became the standard medium of exchange throughout much of the ancient world, testimony to the city's economic influence and the trust other peoples placed in Athenian integrity. The silver mines of Laurium provided the raw materials for this monetary system, But Athena's wisdom guided the city's leaders in using this wealth to support public works, cultural festivals, and military preparedness, rather than mere private luxury. The architectural achievements of Athens reflected the goddess's understanding that public buildings should inspire civic pride while serving practical purposes. The agora, or marketplace, functioned not only as a center of commerce, but as a gathering place where citizens could discuss political issues, hear public announcements, and participate in the democratic process. The careful design of these public spaces encouraged the kind of informal interaction that strengthened social bonds and promoted civic engagement. Athena's temples throughout the Greek world served as centers of learning and cultural exchange, where travelers could find not only spiritual solace, but also practical assistance and intellectual stimulation. The goddess's priests and priestesses maintained libraries, provided hospitality to scholars and artists, and preserved important documents that might otherwise have been lost to fire, war, or simple neglect. These religious institutions functioned as early universities, supporting research and education, while maintaining their primary spiritual purposes. The mystery schools associated with Athena's worship developed sophisticated philosophical and spiritual teachings that prepared initiates for deeper understanding of divine truth and human purpose. These secret traditions, while maintaining their esoteric character, influence broader intellectual developments by encouraging systematic thinking about metaphysical questions and the relationship between human consciousness and divine reality. Through all these diverse manifestations of her influence, Athena remained fundamentally the goddess of wisdom applied to practical problems, of intelligence guided by moral purpose, of strength tempered by justice. Her legacy extended far beyond the ancient world to influence the development of democratic ideals, scientific methodology, and humanitarian values that continue to shape human civilization today. The grey-eyed goddess, who sprang fully formed from Zeus's head, had become the eternal symbol of humanity's highest aspirations, the divine embodiment of the belief that reason, creativity, and moral courage could triumph over ignorance, chaos, and tyranny. The golden age of Athens represented more than mere political dominance or economic prosperity. Under Athena's watchful guidance, the city became a laboratory for human potential, where mortals explored the furthest reaches of intellectual achievement while maintaining their connection to divine wisdom. The goddess understood that civilization required more than impressive monuments or military victories. True greatness demanded the cultivation of human character, the development of institutions that could outlast individual leaders, and the creation of cultural achievements that would inspire future generations across the centuries. In the shadowed porticos of the academy, where Plato gathered his most promising students, Athena's presence could be felt in every philosophical dialogue that sought to distinguish between appearance and reality. The goddess had planted seeds of inquiry that would bloom into systematic investigations of justice, beauty, truth, and the ideal forms that existed beyond the material world. These intellectual pursuits were not merely academic exercises, but practical preparations for the responsibilities of leadership in a democratic society. The mathematical discoveries that emerged from Athens under the goddess's influence revolutionized human understanding of the natural world. Geometers like Euclid developed logical systems that revealed the underlying patterns governing spatial relationships, while astronomers began mapping the movements of celestial bodies with unprecedented precision. Athena recognized that mathematical knowledge served both practical and spiritual purposes, providing tools for engineering and navigation while revealing the divine order that structured the cosmos itself. Her influence extended into the realm of medicine, where Athenian physicians pioneered approaches to healing that balanced empirical observation with theoretical understanding. The goddess guided practitioners toward recognition that effective treatment required not only knowledge of symptoms and remedies, but also wisdom about each patient's unique circumstances. This holistic approach to medicine reflected Athena's broader philosophy that true expertise demanded both technical skill and deep understanding of human nature. The agricultural innovations that flourished under Athenian influence demonstrated the goddess's commitment to sustainable prosperity, rather than short-term exploitation. Farmers learned to rotate crops in patterns that preserved soil fertility while maximizing yields, to terrace hillsides that might otherwise erode into uselessness, and to develop irrigation systems that conserved precious water resources while supporting expanded cultivation. These techniques spread throughout the Mediterranean world, carrying Athenian wisdom to distant lands, where her influence had never been directly felt. Yet even as Athens reached the pinnacle of its cultural achievements, the seeds of future challenges were already taking root. The goddess possessed the divine gift of foresight, understanding that human greatness often contained within itself the potential for its own destruction. Pride, that most dangerous of human emotions, began to creep into Athenian hearts as their city's accomplishments earned recognition throughout the known world. The transformation of the Delian League from a voluntary association into an Athenian empire marked a crucial turning point in the city's moral development. Where once Athens had led through example and persuasion, increasingly it began to rely upon force and intimidation to maintain its position. The goddess watched with growing concern as her chosen city abandoned the principles of justice and mutual respect that had originally guided its rise to prominence. The Peloponnesian War, that devastating conflict between Athens and Sparta that would consume the Greek world for nearly 3 decades, represented a profound test of Athena's influence and the values she had sought to instill in human civilization. The goddess found herself in the impossible position of watching her beloved city engage in actions that contradicted everything she had taught about the proper relationship between strength and wisdom, between power and responsibility. Sparta, Athens' primary rival, embodied a fundamentally different approach to human organization and values. Where Athens celebrated intellectual achievement and democratic participation, Sparta emphasized military discipline and unquestioning obedience to authority. The Spartan system produced warriors of legendary courage and skill, but at the cost of individual creativity and moral flexibility. Their society resembled a perfectly functioning military machine, efficient and deadly, yet lacking the capacity for the kind of cultural innovation that had made Athens the intellectual center of the ancient world. The contrast between these two approaches to civilization forced the goddess to confront difficult questions about the nature of human society and the proper balance between competing values. Both cities claimed her patronage in their prayers and sacrifices, yet their fundamental philosophies seemed irreconcilably opposed. Could military excellence coexist with intellectual freedom? Was it possible to maintain democratic ideals while exercising imperial power? These questions had no easy answers, even for a goddess of wisdom. As the war progressed through its bloody phases, Athena witnessed the gradual corruption of both sides. Athenian democracy, stressed by military necessity and popular fear, began making decisions based on emotion rather than careful deliberation. The execution of the generals after the Battle of Arginusae, despite their tactical victory, demonstrated how fear and anger could overwhelm the rational processes that had once distinguished Athenian governance. Meanwhile, Sparta's alliance with Persia, the traditional enemy of all Greek freedom, revealed how military pragmatism could override the cultural values that supposedly defined Hellenic identity. The goddess observed with growing dismay as both cities sacrificed their founding principles for temporary advantage, undermining the very foundations that had made them worthy of divine favor. The plague that struck Athens during the war's early years provided a particularly stark demonstration of how human suffering could challenge even the most sophisticated philosophical systems. The disease that killed Pericles and thousands of ordinary citizens respected neither wisdom nor virtue, neither wealth nor poverty. In the face of inexplicable mortality, many Athenians abandoned their commitment to rational inquiry and democratic deliberation, turning instead to superstition, desperation, and the pursuit of immediate gratification. Yet even during these dark years, Athena's influence continued to manifest through individuals who maintained their commitment to the goddess's ideals despite overwhelming pressure to abandon them. Socrates, that gadfly of Athens whose relentless questioning challenged conventional wisdom and comfortable assumptions, embodied the intellectual courage that the goddess had always sought to inspire in mortals. His willingness to accept death, rather than cease his philosophical investigations, demonstrated that divine wisdom could sustain human beings even in the face of ultimate adversity. The trial and execution of Socrates represented a profound failure of Athenian democracy, yet it also revealed the enduring power of the principles he had championed. His students, particularly Plato, would carry forward his commitment to rational inquiry and moral integrity, eventually establishing schools that would preserve and develop philosophical wisdom long after the political system that had condemned him had crumbled into historical memory. Athena recognized that civilizations, like individual mortals, followed cycles of birth, growth, maturity, decline, and death. Yet the goddess understood that cultural achievements could transcend political boundaries and historical periods, carrying forward the best elements of human creativity, even as specific societies rose and fell. The intellectual traditions established in Athens would survive the city's political collapse, spreading throughout the Hellenistic world and eventually influencing Roman, Islamic, and Christian civilizations. The conquests of Alexander the Great, that remarkable student of Aristotle who carried Greek culture to the edges of the known world, demonstrated how Athena's influence could spread far beyond its original geographic boundaries. The young Macedonian king had absorbed the philosophical and scientific achievements of Athens through his education, and his military campaigns served as vehicles for disseminating Greek learning throughout the vast territories he conquered. Alexander's approach to conquest reflected many of the strategic principles that Athena had taught through her guidance of earlier heroes. Rather than simply destroying the civilizations he encountered, the young king sought to synthesize Greek wisdom with the knowledge and customs of conquered peoples. His establishment of libraries and schools in cities like Alexandria created centers of learning that would preserve and develop human knowledge for centuries to come. The Library of Alexandria, that great repository of ancient wisdom, represented perhaps the most ambitious realization of Athena's vision for human intellectual development. Scholars from throughout the known world gathered in this institution to study mathematics, astronomy, medicine, literature, and philosophy. The library's systematic collection and preservation of texts ensured that important knowledge would not be lost to war, fire, or simple neglect. Under the goddess's subtle influence, Alexandrian scholars made discoveries that advanced human understanding in numerous fields. They calculated the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy, developed sophisticated mechanical devices that demonstrated principles of physics and engineering, and created detailed maps that guided navigation and exploration. These achievements built upon the intellectual foundations laid in Athens, while extending human knowledge into previously unexplored territories. The medical school at Alexandria became particularly renowned for its systematic approach to understanding human anatomy and physiology. Physicians there conducted detailed dissections that revealed the structure and function of organs, developed surgical techniques that could save lives previously thought beyond hope, and established diagnostic methods that distinguished between different diseases with previously impossible precision. These medical advances reflected Athena's understanding that true wisdom required both theoretical knowledge and practical application. The mathematical work conducted at Alexandria produced advances that would influence human thought for millennia. Euclid's systematic organization of geometric principles established logical frameworks that became models for all subsequent mathematical reasoning. Archimedes developed methods for calculating areas and volumes that prefigured the calculus, while Apollonius explored the properties of conic sections that would eventually prove crucial for understanding planetary motion. These intellectual achievements were not merely abstract exercises, but practical tools that improved human life in countless ways. The principles of engineering developed by Alexandrian scholars enabled the construction of more efficient aqueducts, stronger bridges, and more accurate timepieces. Their astronomical calculations improved navigation and calendar systems, while their medical discoveries reduced suffering and extended human lifespans. Yet Athena understood that knowledge without wisdom could become dangerous, that technical capability divorced from moral purpose might ultimately harm rather than help humanity. The goddess worked to ensure that the scholars who benefited from her inspiration remained mindful of their responsibilities to use their discoveries for beneficial purposes, rather than mere personal advancement or destructive ends. The rise of Rome presented new challenges and opportunities for the spread of Athenian wisdom throughout the ancient world. The Romans, initially more focused on military conquest and political administration than philosophical speculation, gradually recognized the value of Greek learning and began incorporating it into their own educational and cultural systems. Athena found in certain Roman leaders kindred spirits who understood that lasting empire required more than military force. Marcus Tullius Cicero, that great orator and philosopher who defended the Roman Republic during its final crisis, embodied many of the intellectual and moral qualities that Athena had sought to cultivate in human leaders. His speeches combined rhetorical skill with philosophical depth. His political actions reflected commitment to constitutional principles, even at personal cost. And his writings preserved and developed Greek philosophical traditions for future generations. The goddess recognized in Cicero a mortal who understood that effective leadership required not only practical skill, but also moral authority based on wisdom and integrity. His efforts to maintain republican institutions against the ambitions of would-be dictators demonstrated the kind of courageous commitment to principle that had always characterized those who truly served Athena's ideals. Even as the Roman Republic collapsed into civil war and eventual autocracy, the goddess's influence continued to manifest through institutions and traditions that preserved elements of democratic governance and intellectual freedom. Roman law, with its systematic organization and emphasis on rational principles, carried forward many of the legal innovations that had originated in Athens. Roman schools maintained Greek educational traditions that emphasized both practical skills and philosophical understanding. The spread of Christianity throughout the Roman Empire created new challenges for the preservation of classical wisdom. Yet Athena's influence adapted to these changing circumstances. Early Christian scholars like Augustine of Hippo demonstrated how Greek philosophical methods could be applied to theological questions, creating synthetic approaches to learning that combined faith with reason, revelation with systematic inquiry. The preservation of classical texts in Christian monasteries ensured that Athenian achievements in philosophy, science, and literature would survive the political upheavals that marked the end of the ancient world. Monks who copied manuscripts were often unaware that they were serving as agents of Athena's continuing influence. Yet their patient labor preserved knowledge that would eventually contribute to the intellectual renaissance of later centuries. The Islamic conquests of the 7th and 8th centuries created another avenue for the preservation and development of classical wisdom. Muslim scholars in cities like Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba translated Greek texts into Arabic, adding their own commentaries and original contributions that advanced human understanding in mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and philosophy. These Islamic scholars recognized no contradiction between religious faith and rational inquiry, continuing the tradition of synthetic wisdom that Athena had always championed. The eventual return of classical learning to Western Europe through translations from Arabic sources demonstrated the goddess's ability to work through diverse cultural and religious traditions to preserve and advance human knowledge. The medieval universities that emerged in cities like Paris, Oxford, and Bologna created institutional frameworks for systematic learning that built upon both classical foundations and contemporary innovations. Throughout these historical transformations, Athena's essential nature remained constant, even as her manifestations adapted to changing circumstances. She continued to inspire mortals who sought to combine intellectual excellence with moral integrity, who understood that true wisdom required both theoretical knowledge and practical application, who recognized that lasting achievement depended upon serving purposes greater than mere personal advancement. The goddess's influence could be traced through the lives of countless individuals who may never have consciously invoked her name, yet embodied her ideals in their work and character. Scientists who pursued truth despite persecution, teachers who preserved knowledge through dark periods of history, leaders who chose principle over expediency, artists who created beauty that inspired and elevated human consciousness, all served as instruments of Athena's continuing presence in human affairs. As centuries passed into millennia, the grey-eyed goddess remained eternally watchful, eternally patient, eternally committed to the belief that human beings possessed the capacity for wisdom, justice, and creative achievement that could transcend the limitations of their mortal existence. Her story had become inseparable from the larger narrative of human civilization itself, a testament to the enduring power of intelligence guided by virtue, of strength tempered by compassion, of divine inspiration working through mortal dedication to create something greater than either could achieve alone. The medieval period witnessed profound transformations in how humanity understood divine wisdom and its earthly manifestations. Yet through these centuries of change, Athena's essential influence persisted in forms both recognizable and remarkably adapted to new circumstances. The goddess who had once guided Greek heroes and inspired Athenian philosophers now worked through different channels, her wisdom flowing like an underground river that occasionally surfaced in unexpected places, nourishing minds that had never heard her ancient name yet embodied her timeless principles. During the Byzantine Empire's 1,000-year reign, scholars in Constantinople maintained direct connections to classical learning that had been largely severed in Western Europe. These learned men, working in monasteries and imperial libraries, preserved not merely the texts of ancient philosophers, but something of the spirit that had originally animated their inquiries. When they copied Plato's dialogues or Aristotle's treatises on ethics and politics, they participated unknowingly in Athena's continuing mission to preserve rational discourse and systematic thinking as foundations for human progress. The Empress Theodora, wife of Justinian, demonstrated how the goddess's influence could manifest through powerful women who understood that true authority required both intelligence and moral purpose. Her role in establishing legal protections for women, her support for theological scholarship, and her strategic counsel during political crises reflected the same synthesis of wisdom and decisive action that had characterized Athena's guidance of ancient heroes. Though Theodora worshipped Christ rather than the Olympian gods, her approach to leadership embodied principles that the grey-eyed goddess had always championed. The codification of Roman law under Justinian created legal frameworks that would influence European jurisprudence for over a millennium. This monumental project required exactly the kind of systematic organization and logical analysis that Athena had always encouraged in human affairs. The scholars who compiled these legal codes drew upon centuries of judicial precedent and philosophical reflection, creating comprehensive systems that balanced practical necessity with theoretical coherence. Their work demonstrated how divine wisdom could operate through human institutions, creating structures that transcended individual lifetimes to serve justice across generations. In the monasteries of Ireland, where learning had taken refuge during the chaotic centuries following Rome's collapse, monks preserved classical texts with devotion that bordered on the sacred. These Irish scholars understood their copying work as a form of worship, yet they also maintained the intellectual curiosity that had driven ancient philosophers to question accepted assumptions and seek deeper truths. Their illuminated manuscripts combined artistic beauty with scholarly precision, creating works that honored both divine inspiration and human craftsmanship in ways that would have pleased Athena profoundly. The Vikings, those seafaring warriors whose raids had terrorized much of Europe, paradoxically served as agents for the preservation and transmission of learning. Their extensive trade networks carried not only goods, but ideas across vast distances, connecting isolated scholarly communities and facilitating intellectual exchanges that might otherwise have been impossible. Even their oral traditions, with their emphasis on clever wordplay and strategic thinking, reflected certain aspects of the wisdom tradition that Athena had established among earlier peoples. When Viking chieftains settled in foreign lands and adopted local customs, they often demonstrated remarkable adaptability and political intelligence. Their ability to synthesize different cultural traditions, to learn new languages and legal systems, to transform from raiders into rulers and eventually into pillars of medieval society, showed how practical wisdom could overcome initial hostility and create lasting peace. These transformations required exactly the kind of strategic thinking and long-term planning that the goddess had always valued above mere military prowess. And so we reach the end of our journey through the ages with Athena, the grey-eyed goddess whose influence flows like an eternal river through the course of human civilization. From her extraordinary birth, from Zeus's mind, to her guidance of heroes and nations, from the golden age of Athens to the preservation of wisdom through dark centuries. Her story reveals a profound truth about the nature of divine power and human potential. Athena's legacy transcends the boundaries of ancient mythology to become something far greater, a timeless symbol of the belief that intelligence, guided by moral purpose, can triumph over chaos and ignorance. Her wisdom continues to inspire those who understand that true strength lies not in the sword alone, but in the mind that wields it with justice and foresight. As you drift into peaceful sleep, carry with you the knowledge that the goddess of wisdom watches still, her owl's eyes ever vigilant, her influence eternal, reminding us that the greatest victories are won not through force, but through the patient application of wisdom, courage, and unwavering commitment to truth.